Am I speaking to Dr. Divya Mishra or Dr. Divya Mishra in the making, or a Dr. Divya Mishra who merely registered for PhD but serious about civil services? ये तीनों में कौन सा category है?
Sir, I have finished my defense, so it's a complete degree now.
Oh, so I'm speaking to Dr. Divya Mishra.
Yes, sir.
Good, good. It's a great thing. I could never be a PhD in my entire life. So ठीक है. The second thing is you are those uncommon kind of a people. In spite of a very good rank, you joined textile technology. It is some kind of an engineering only, shayad. Is it not
Yes.
engineering? B.Tech.
So it's a pure engineering, sir. It's a B.Tech.
Acha. So some kind of mechanical engineering type. What exactly do you learn in the 4 years of textile technology?
So we learn about the spinning process where the yarn is made, about the natural fibers, their characteristics, about the synthetic fibers, the technical textile, and how the fabric is made, knitting process. So all of this. So we are more into the textile and with some part about the textile machinery. There is another branch, textile engineering. So it deals with the mechanical aspect of it.
Very good. You demystified the matter. So you also have subjects like some kind of marketing. Do you have marketing also?
No, sir, not marketing particularly, sir.
Acha. Once the yarn is made or the cloth is made, I suppose your subjects include not only the yarn making but also the cloth making.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Good. So you studied in the technology, that College of Textile Technology in Kanpur. Is it because your mother originally is from Kanpur or some other reason? Or the textile technology exists only in Kanpur?
So, based on my rank and the day of counseling, this was my first choice because it's a government institute and also because I am from Kanpur. That factor was there. And so, we have very few institutes in our country for textiles.
Good. So during your 4-year stay, which are the mills you visited? And Kanpur at one time had lots of mills,
Yes.
but there are still some mills, I suppose. It has not completely closed down all mills. So which are the mills you visited?
So, once I went to Lal Imli, but only at the outskirts. My father has taken me there, and also the JK Cotton Mill, which was also closed. But apart from this, not in Kanpur, but in Punjab, where I worked, and Vardhaman, where I interned. So these I have better experience about.
Okay, okay. So you entered the precincts of the great Lal Imli. मेरा बचपन में the best woolen garments were made by them.
Yes, sir.
मगर आजकल तो बंद हो गया क्या? Is it still working or sold away as a real estate or something?
Sir, 5% utilization of the capacity is there, but it's very negligible.
अच्छा, because market में तो आजकल I'm only seeing Raymonds. I don't see much of Lal Imli. मेरा बचपन में, in fact, when we were in Mussoorie, when we joined as probationers, Mussoorie being a somewhat cold place, the tailor would always recommend, not Raymond, Lal Imli, ये लीजिए आपके jacket के लिए. So that is how my personal experience of Lal Imli is. दूसरा, you worked in Barnala. ये Trident वाला कौन सा, what kind of a mill is it? Does it make cloth or does it make yarn, or what exactly is Trident?
Sir, it is into yarn business, the towel business, and also paper business. But I worked in their spinning mill, in the yarn business.
Achha. And after the yarn is made, they won't use it. They'll sell it away to somewhere else, somebody else.
Yes, sir. It's a business to business business model. So spinning yarn is sent to the weaving mills for the fabric.
Okay, okay. So is it man-made fabric, that man-made yarn that they were doing, or is it cotton or wool or something like that?
So they were dealing with the cotton and some cotton blends like cotton polyester viscose in different proportions. and sometimes running 100% cotton also, but not the man-made, sir.
So, being ignorant of the textile technology, supposing somebody says this particular shirt of yours is made from a cloth 67% terine and 33% cotton, does it mean at the yarn stage itself they mix both this polyester and cotton, or cotton yarn is separate and polyester is separate, and these are woven together as some kind of horizontal and vertical or something like that? How exactly is that 67-33% made?
So it is the fiber blend mostly.
Kya, Baba?
The fiber stage itself.
I'm not able to read.
At fiber stage. Yes, sir.
Now
at the
slow down.
fiber stage, yes, sir. Sir, at the fiber stage itself, the blend is done before the yarn manufacturing. That out of 100 kg, there would be 67 kg of the cotton and 33 kg of the polyester. So this is how it happens.
That means different strands. For example, 2 strands of polyester and 1 strand of cotton will be spun into one yarn, is it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That gives better blending. We call it melange.
Achha, achha. Bahut achha. Arey, thanks to this interview, I'm slowly getting demystified in these matters. Achha, aapne you used a word called viscose. ये viscose क्या चीज है? Is it cotton or is it polyester?
Sir, it is neither of these two. It is a regenerated fiber. We make viscose from the cellulosic content from the wood or other cellulose rich items, and then through their separate way of processing, it is drawn into fibers of viscose. So it is in between the man-made and natural category.
So that means, but the source is neither petrochemicals, which polyester is, yes, nor a plant called cotton, which is like paddy, etc. It's grown from the soil, yes, but sir, some other natural material like wood.
Yes, lignocellulosic content is used.
Okay, so that means there are separate mills which produce viscose, or yes, factories, which factories whose raw material is actually wood.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what exactly? Why then? What are the qualities, attributes of this viscose? Is it more comfortable than polyester, or is it less comfortable than cotton? Ultimately, in degrees of comfort, cotton is the most comfortable.
Yes, sir.
Discomfort level for Indian climatic conditions, polyester is the most uncomfortable.
Yes, sir.
तो ये viscose किस लिए मिलाते हैं? Why do they blend viscose?
Sir, it is a comfort fabric, and it reduces the static generation, and the fineness of this fiber is also very high. Its affinity with the cotton and along with polyester is also very high. So it, given our tropical conditions and also in the Western countries, because of its lightweight and comfort, it is highly preferred.
So this viscose will inhibit or reduce the generation of static electricity.
Yes, sir.
Static बोले तो वही static electricity.
Yes, sir.
And cotton itself does not contribute to static electricity, is it?
So very less, very less.
So all these, the static electricity whenever I remove my shirt is largely because of the polyester content.
Sir, in the man-made, there is higher tendency to generate the static.
Sometimes in a dark night, I even see sparks.
Yes,
as
sir.
if it's an electricity that is, discharge, some kind of a lightning, but of very small magnitude. Yes. It's not of great energy, but there are discharges. There are some kind of sparks or that kind of a thing. Okay, we have Dr. Satyanarayana, who is waiting in the wings to carry on this. However, before we finally conclude, all of us, then again I'll come back to you
Yes,
and give you some kind of a feedback. ठीक है?
yes, sir.
So I'll now hand you over to Dr. Satyanarayana.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Miss Divya, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. So I was very much happy to see that you are reflecting on the ideas of Yuval Noah Harari. So why are you so interested in this personality?
Sir, first of all, his own personality, he belongs to homosexual community. And
Yes.
I like the way he's true to himself and speaking out and giving the voice to a lot of voiceless people.
Exactly.
So second is his work. His 3 books I have read, and he has touched upon God, nation, culture, and corporations, company laws, and call them as imagined reality.
Yes.
That they are all mental. So it becomes we become very prone to manipulations, and that is why it is very essential to have diverse point of views. And this is what attracts me. So many things that happens in our country or in international affairs can be seen through these lenses.
So he is a public intellectual.
Yes, sir. To a large extent, sir.
Yes. So that's the word is very, very enticing and very interesting. Would you throw some light on this word? Who is a public intellectual? So
Sir,
I want, yeah, please go on.
Sir, I have not heard the word, but let me try to think about how it would mean, what it would mean, sir. I think those people who can reflect, criticize, and incorporate some alternative point of views to the existing belief system, which manifest the public affairs like health, education, nation, war, state. So they may be called public intellectuals. But I am not sure about its.
Yeah, you're right. You are coming to the point. Can you cite some public intellectuals from India?
Sir, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, former governor of RBI.
Yes.
And there is Karan Thapar, who runs the interviews of various people. So I like the way debate goes.
Yeah, that's true. I think you might have heard the name Romila Thapar.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Romila Thapar.
She herself wrote that book, Public Intellectual. And of course, India produced large number of public intellectuals. But the point here is, at present, when you look at the society, the number to the population, 130 crore population, but the number of the public intellectuals is very, very minuscule.
Yes, sir.
So now tell me, Divya, with your understanding, because India produced a large number of the public intellectuals in that time, in the 6th century BC, when the Gautam Buddha and all these people, they're all public intellects, they came out with alternative things. But we failed to produce such type of intellectual, what we can say, the fermentation during the medieval period, and even in the modern period also, the number is very less. Now, I want to know, because you are a student of philosophy, because you learned a lot on this part, why India failed to produce a considerable number of public intellectuals?
Sir, based on my own life experience, I entered into the world as an engineer.
Okay.
So now I find myself more attracted to the public debates, society, politics. I think a lot of something like this that was me has happened to a lot of students. There are career-related demands. So because of which these interests are not cultivated. And so second is the risk-taking aptitude. To be an intellectual, one has to have the ability to positively, constructively criticize. And this space must be provided by the government and by the system to have more number of such intellectuals. sharing their ideas.
So space is to be created by the intellectual himself. Government is not going to create because government wants to maintain the status quo, isn't
Yes, sir.
it?
Yes.
So you have to create the space by yourself. So you are going to receive definitely some brickbats,
Yes,
but
sir.
bouquets also will come later. But for that you must be ready for that. Unless you are ready for receiving these things, because you are going against the tide.
Yes,
When
sir.
you go against the tide, definitely you are going to receive such type of brickbats.
Yes, sir.
So the type of mindset comes to people in particular, that means these people should have that type of mindset. So my question here is, how can we develop a mindset which can go against the status quoism and create something positive and constructive to the society?
Sir, I would focus more on the way our education goes. Our education should not be restricted to the theoretical themes and ideas, but should be more in sync with the realities of our life. For example, communalism, casteism, environmental related sensitivity, lack of inclusivity is a reality of our country. And I never, in such concrete, bold terms, have read these things in my NCRTs. I went through these things when in my preparation of UPSC. Now I reflect that how much I was distant from the real societal issues. So this level of sensitization should begin from the families and, more importantly, education in its terms of the education content and also the way the procedures are uh, determined of our education system.
Okay, did you hear the name Henry Derazio?
Derazio, sir,
Yeah, he was instrumental for this Young Bengal movement.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He was the first one. Yes, sir. Young Bengal
Yes,
movement.
yeah. So what is his contribution to the intellectual development of that movement?
Sir, if I could borrow your word, he was one of the first public intellectuals, and a lot of youth from Bengal in the very beginning of 1780s followed him, and he gave these ideas for women education, widow marriage, abolition of caste system, abolition of untouchability, and overall a Socratic method of having dialogues with the students to let them think and reflect about what is being taught and come up as individuals who have their own mindset and attitude towards life.
Nice. Okay. Did you hear the name M.N. Roy? M.N. Roy?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what is his contribution?
Sir, he was a radical humanist who believed that freedom is not a goal, it is a process. And that everything that we do has to be centered around this. And a human could only realize its essence when the human is free. And if this liberty could be translated into economics, then it leads to more decentralization, more devolution of powers, and in society, the dignity of human that we saw eroded in the COVID, for example, it should be uplifted. More right to life, more privacy, more liberty.
Divya, tell us, what is the pleasure of studying philosophy? Because you studied, you are well-educated lady, and you studied and you took philosophy as your option subject. Hope that you definitely enjoy the subject called philosophy. What is the pleasure of philosophy? I want to know.
So it has transformed me a lot because I know I am more silent now, more observant now. From a sentimental, I have become more sensitive to the real issues. And it has given me profound curiosity about everything and a humility to accept that there are more number of things that I do not know than the things that I do know. And this being on the learning always, watching out what more is there that I was not looking in the right way. So this is what I appreciate the most, and I hope it stays with me for as long as I am.
Very nice. Okay. When we start with the philosophy, I think we can remember the founders of Indian philosophy.
Yes, sir.
Can you throw some light on who are the founders of this Indian philosophy? A couple of people, enough.
So we have Gautam Buddha, and from then on, the Mahavira and the Anekantavada of Jainism. Kapil Muni, his Sankhya school of philosophy, Patanjali's yoga philosophy, and
yeah. Prior to that, can you go back a bit further and see who are the founders? So I think Upanishads are the fountain head for the Indian philosophy.
Yes, sir.
From that, we can get a couple of people who are in fact the founders for the two streams of the philosophy of India. Can you?
Shankaracharya, Adi Shankaracharya, he was the founder of Vedanta.
Shankaracharya came in the 9th century.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's almost 782, almost 812, like that. So I'm talking about the true founders of Indian philosophy. You got idea?
Sir, the one thing coming to my mind right now is Purana Kasapa and Shraman movement.
Yeah,
But,
they're all the 6th century BC philosophers, including Gautam Buddha.
So then I have to accept my ignorance. I need to read about it.
It's okay. No problem. Now tell me, being a lady, I would like to know who are the women philosophers in India and out in the world also.
So in contemporary times, it is the one of the prominent name is Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. She's now settled in US. She has talked about the can subaltern speak, the issue of the socioeconomic disadvantaged section of our society and women. So apart from this, in the Sufi saints, we find many women philosophers like Lal Ded from Kashmir and Mirabai. And so there are
Mirabai is a philosopher. She is a just saint like that lady. So can we get any philosophy from them?
So their philosophy is like perceiving the unity with the totality. So it is one of the philosophy of religion school, but not the core philosophies.
Okay. So finally, tell us the philosophy of Ayn Rand and how it is relevant today.
So Hannah Arendt.
Yeah.
We're talking
Russian here.
Sir, I read her work, The Banality of Evil. Is this the one you are referring to?
No, that's Atlas Shrugged. So there are Ayn Rand.
Sir, I have not come across this philosophers. I am a philosopher. I need to read about it.
AYN. She's a lady.
Lady.
Ayn Rand is a very famous lady. And I thought you must have heard of her. Well, she is a philosopher of the 20th century.
Sir said as AYN. So that she was a Russian lady, but she brought a great philosophy from her point of view. Oh, it's okay, Divya. And now I will hand over to Sri Somshekhar-ji.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Dr. Divya Mishra.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. They are very impressive academic credentials, and also you have traversed some portion of industry as well. So you are now in the textile industry in Barnala, where you have a couple of years of working with the Trident Group, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So the textile industry is considered one of the most polluting.
But is she still working? I thought
No, I think last 2 years she was working in
Barnala, are you still in touch, or have you given up in pursuit of the civil service and PhD?
Sir, I left my job in 2016 to pursue PhD. And I completed my PhD just now. And last year I got into IRTS. So, as of now, this is my status.
Okay,
so
since you left, okay.
Okay, I mean that means you have been formally admitted into Indian Railway Traffic Service, but you are awaiting training. Am I right?
Yes, sir. I have taken the extraordinary leave because of PhD pending work, and also the mains of this year was within 1 month.
So if the outcome of the present interview is positive, then in all probability you'll join IAS. Otherwise, you'll go to Baroda and join the Railway Staff College. Am I right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So, you carry on. Dr. Somashekar will continue.
So anyway, 4-5 years since you left the textile industry, but the textile industry is considered one of the most polluting.
Yes.
And also you have worked on some repurposing of fabrics and all that. So please tell me how this pollution aspect of the industry can be overcome. Are there any steps being taken? Are there any regulators to control it? How is the industry responding to measures of controlling pollution?
So a lot of water which is being used is discharged untreated. So for that, zero liquid discharge is a technology with which the Trident Group was working. So this is one thing. And second is, for example, the handloom sector, the Banarasi silk sarees. So I am coming across the research where with IIT BHU, they are working on natural dyes, which are more biodegradable in nature. And so thirdly, the effluent treatment plants on a common basis or individual basis. So they can be done.
Are these being done? Is there any regulator who will pull up the industry if they are not doing? And predominantly, I think water is getting polluted because of most of this activity.
Yes, sir.
So are there any efforts to, remove these pollutants? And as the Pollution Control Board effective?
So effectiveness is there in large organized sectors where I have worked. But in Kanpur, for example, I have seen the individual effluent treatment plants, and because the scale of companies which are working there is so small, that this control and regulation has not been effective so far.
Mm-hmm.
There have been frequent violations.
Kanpur is a big textile hub, for a long time.
So it is more into the unorganized textile businesses like hosiery.
Okay. Now, you also did some strategic alliance as part of your PhD program. Now, please tell me, what are the strategic alliances in corporate and business? Some examples. How do they work? What are the criterion to arrive at a strategic alliance? Example is Walmart and Reliance a strategic alliance, or how do you describe?
So strategic alliances work in a more volatile and uncertain situation. They can be equity based, like joint ventures. They can also be non-equity based and can be in the form of contractual agreement or buyer and seller agreement. So we have an alliance of the Barnes and Nobles. This is a bookstore.
Okay.
Yeah. So they have this with the Starbucks coffee. We have the alliance of Tata with the Starbucks coffee. And apart from this, many PPP projects are coming up, various joint ventures, Hero Honda, Maruti Suzuki. So these were also alliances. And at G2G level, so we have now international solar alliances with India leading with more than 120 countries in the grouping.
Do they really help in, I think, creating more wealth and more employment for say countries like India to go into strategic alliances?
So a lot depends on the sector in which these alliances are made and the relative competitive advantage of the industry. So they are made because if a company or country have competitive advantage in certain resources and the others it does not have, so it seeks to take that resource and capability from its alliance partner.
So if you look at, for example, the vaccine segment,
Yes, sir.
in the current, for a long time, the indigenous vaccine makers were protected. Then the foreign direct investment was increased. finally, I think now virtually 100% foreign equity is allowed.
Yes, sir.
Now, this, according to me, is a strategic area where India would have had a very good advantage if we had supported and produced vaccines on a large scale. Now, how
Yes.
do you perceive this? Should the Indian companies have been protected? Foreign direct investment should have been less than, say, 50%, or has the change helped in any way for us to scale up quickly? How does it work according to you? Please give me some clarity. We are all confused now.
Sir, I could not understand your question completely.
Now, see, in vaccine manufacture, earlier the Bharat Biotechs or Serum Institute, they had lot of advantages from the government.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So in the last 10, 15 years, the foreign investment limit has been raised to nearly 100%.
Yes, sir.
So therefore, the vaccine manufacturers are facing a lot of competition, and if you look at, they're becoming contract manufacturers
Yes, sir.
instead of developing.
Yes, sir.
Now, if you look at the global market, we are under a threat that we will completely become a manufacturer, not a developer of vaccines and all. So,
Yes, sir.
so we are losing a lot.
Yes, sir. Sir, co-makership alliances were made. So the Bharat Biotech and Serum are examples of that. But we should have gone into the R&D alliances and technology transfer agreements. And this could have been possible by more fiscal incentives and the corporate incentives from the government and better technological economic zones where this could have been carried out. And a lot of human capital development as part of these exchange programs with academia, institutes of virology, and institutes of public health. So this should have been made stakeholders in these alliances and a contract party.
Do you think the demand for making IP open and giving access to patents and all for the manufacturers so that the world gets vaccines is a justifiable demand in this current context?
Sir, I'm in favor of liberalizing the patent norms for a few years till we fight with the pandemic. I believe this is the way forward to have more equitable and justifiable distribution, not just in our country, but across our globe.
And again, if that happens, do you think with the current capabilities or capacities of manufacture, India has the potential to, say, reach the demand by the end of the year as the ministers claim, or is this not a practical, scenario?
So the current estimation given by the government is that both Covaxin and Covishield will be producing 10 crore doses a month in August and September respectively. But given our demand of 200 billion doses, I think it is a little difficult, and we should have gone for more agreements with the Janssen vaccine and Pfizer, Moderna, and very quickly with the advance orders as well as payments. Our domestic capacity is a bit restricted, sir.
Now coming to the industry academia, you have been on both sides. Is it a lot of slogan, or has it gained momentum in India? There is a lot of mistrust between industry and academia. What is your experience and what is the way forward if we really have to achieve some of the goals we can set?
So I think difference between the theory that we read and the realities in industry where I also worked. So the gap is huge. There is also time lag. Industry is moving very fast. And research is going on, but it is mostly in the theoretical areas and not in the applied areas of technology. So this needs to be done. However, startup business shows that we are the third largest in the world in terms of the total number of startups as well as their in value terms. But we need more a faculty exchange, a student exchange, and those people who have worked in industry, asking them to join research programs so that they can get that feedback from industry again, and asking floating schemes where the foreign institutes researchers could come into our institutes, and some more workshops, and maybe one PhD, one patent. So these programs could be rolled out, giving more incentives.
No, for example, I tell you there is one National Research Development Corporation, NRDC. You must have heard of. They have the technologies developed by all the public funded institutions, laboratories with them. Now, if you look at the technology transfer to industry, that is Indian industry, it is less than 10 to 15%. So they are sitting in a lot of technologies, but they are not able to transfer it. So the Indian industry is somehow not taking these technologies. So there is some problem. It's the domestic industry and the technology is developed by Indian laboratories.
So the commercializability aspect of a new innovation has to be taken into account. It has to be scalable and viable and attractive for the industries to take up and promote it.
So by this analogy, most of the technologies are, in a way, we can interpret as not commercially viable.
Yes, sir. That is the issue.
So if you come to startups, you are from IIM Ahmedabad, sorry, IIM Lucknow. The number of students graduating from IIMs, and if you look at companies started by them, entrepreneurship, the percentage is quite low, except for the last 5-6 years, perhaps. In this, the number of women taking up entrepreneurship or startup is still low.
Yes, sir.
Now, with your experience, how do you think this can be corrected in at least to some percentage? How can you encourage more women to take up entrepreneurship? What schemes, incentives, what can be done accordingly?
Sir, first would be the immediate solution by all the scheme, for example, National Technical Textile Mission. When we float out mudra loans and startup related fiscal incentives, then keeping 30% or 33% for the women applicants. So this would give a direct benefit to a lot of women who really want to start up their businesses. So second, and a long-term measure could be to see that why women are already disadvantaged to get into the education, and then those who get into the education, there are further constraints because of which entrepreneurship, whose essential nature is risk-taking appetite, that this further gives a glass ceiling and hindrance. So we need to develop a culture where, for example, in management education itself, mainstreaming entrepreneurship into the whole curriculum, a case study to take the loans from the banks. So these could be introduced in the curriculum in a live manner, allowing incentive within the IIM for those students and giving them credits who can start their startup within the IIM and then take it forward when they pass out.
Now, if you look at the practicalities, do women face any handicaps? For example, you finish around 22 or 23, and then entrepreneurship, then you are confronted with some issues of marriage or issues, are these constraints, and is there any way that these can be circumvented? Is there any thinking going on? For example, if you look at jobs, perhaps some good corporates give breaks, and then you come back, or you take up a different role. So are these issues that are hindering entrepreneurship and startup now?
Yes, sir. Entrepreneurship itself demands a lot of courage to not take the salaried jobs and get into these untested waters. And when one has these social family obligations, then one feels further constrained to take on these challenging tasks. So we could try to bridge this gap by providing more support to them through affirmative action, reservation in the policies, particular set of maybe loan subsidies.
You, I think, come from UP. Now, if we look at the way UP government has been handling this pandemic. There are mixed opinions. And one side, you have the handling of Kumbh Mela, then this floating bodies on Ganges. And on the other side, there are some people who say, overall the numbers don't look very scary. What is your perception and what is your understanding of how this pandemic is being handled in UP? Because it's the largest state, and some people, also show how UP, stands number 5 or 4 globally in terms of population. Only 3 other countries are bigger than UP.
Almost equivalent to Brazil.
Yeah. So, what is your view? Are they doing a good job? If they are doing a good job, what is it? If they're not doing a good job, what is the problem?
Sir, I do not think a good job or what citizens had deserved had been delivered so far, because the number of deaths, there has been a lack of data transparency. The real number of casualties and infections far surpass the official records.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of denialism in the government in Uttar Pradesh in the beginning. Now I see a lot of humility in them. A lot of outreach is going on. Administration is reaching to the villages. But sir, the right to health is a fundamental right to the citizens, and this should have been safeguarded, and the citizen deserve better.
No, but the first 3 points you said about underreporting, fudging, or whatever is not unique to UP. I think it's a very general kind of a attitude that many states have taken. But the other side, that they had started doing good. What measures have they taken in, beefing up health infrastructure or reaching vaccination faster, or what form are they now able to do better?
So they have adopted a multi-pronged strategy. So out of 75 districts, 59 nodal officers of senior in administration have been deployed to do camping in these districts, so that there is a sense of urgency. A signal is sent. Chief Minister is also on a random visits to all these districts. There are crisis management committees within the districts, MPs, MLAs, and volunteers. So they are roped in now. And also the testing mechanism using the rapid antigen tests, surveys into these rural areas is taken, and I see more awareness and information dissemination into these regions by the government now.
If you look at the model of how the UP Chief Minister functions, is it democratic or is it very autocratic? Is it a fear factor or is it the coordination that is working? What is your perception there?
Sir, about the current public appearance of the Chief Minister?
Yeah.
So I see a lot of humility and alertness these days in his recent visits, because I think a lot of situation, my parents are also reporting, because they are into Gonda, which is on the eastern side of Uttar Pradesh right now, that things are improving. People are more aware. So right now, situation is a lot better than how we began in Uttar Pradesh.
So in a way, the pandemic has been able to change his attitude to public cause and public issues, how to handle and become more democratic than autocratic in nature.
So this I will take with a pinch of salt, because to many dissenters, various acts like National Security Acts and UPA, it was threatened that they will impose them on the nursing homes, saying that we do not have the oxygen. It goes completely against the democratic spirit. So this will be a little premature to say at this point, sir. When this ends, then an audit maybe could be made by the CAG, and we will have the facts in front of us.
Okay. So you were reflecting on the ideas of Yuval Noah Harari. I think it is one of your, avocations, it looks like. He's quite well known.
Yes, sir.
What ideas I think you really like about him that you think could be relevant to Indian context? or is it purely esoteric that you follow him?
Sir, I follow him because I, being civil service aspirant, there are so many things that he has talked about which have a convergence with how I now look at the world. Ideas that I liked are that it is dangerous to believe in single narratives, that there should always be a diversity in point of views. For example, the way we look at nationalism or way we relate God and religion with the nationalism. So secondly, the way corporate forces and the debate goes on between capitalism and socialism, what is good for our country, the farmer related protest. So these things I view, and it becomes very important for the people in our country to look at the humanity as a whole and not be just bound with loyalty towards their own family or society, but have a better connectivity with the issues of humanity and the global concerns.
So in a way, you're getting heavily influenced and also imbibing a lot of ideas, which I think, according to me, are a bit contradictory in nature to the narrative that is happening in this country today. Now we are going towards the one nation, one ration card, not diversity, but one India. The narrative is a bit different, and also the leadership's attitudes are also in contrast to what I think you are just explained to me. So if you are into a public office, a public servant, who according to Constitution have said we'll do only good things within the ambit of law and help people poor, and also safeguard all that is enshrined in Constitution. Now you will face a lot of challenges within the, I think, governance that is happening. Are you prepared for such a challenge?
Sir, I am preparing for that challenge because I have myself changed a lot. My views have become more mature. I have become mature. But what is the complete extent of it could only be gathered when I actually start working on the field.
Okay, all the best.
Thank you, sir.
Gopal sir.
Okay. Unnara Gopal garu?
Gopal garu, sir.
Okay. Shall I go ahead?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yes, Divya Mishra, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, definitely. Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good. Now, these days, some of the states have got the habit of calling for tenders, for large volumes of works costing 50,000 crores, 60,000 crores, fully knowing that the bid capacity of the prospective bidders is limited. Now, if you are going to be the head of the investment department of the state after getting into IAS, now how do you differentiate between bid rigging or collusive bidding? Because obviously there's no capacity. And then how do you stall this kind of practice and ensure that there is real competition getting into these so-called alliances among the bidders or between?
Sir, I will go digital. First of all, to reduce the human interface, I would ensure that the team which is going to be taking care of the tendering process maintains the confidentiality, has the required probity and integrity within itself. It is very essential in these steps. And so second, to make sure that the interest of all the parties, all the bidders is not hampered, I will try to rationalize the amount and value of these tenders which are being floated out with multi-party consultation with all the relevant stakeholders who are more experts in these areas.
But if you are asked to select an alternative route for competitive bidding, by involving them as private partners instead of making them only EPC contractors, say there is a possibility of the government getting into a partnership with bidders, one or two big bidders. So what procurement route would you follow? Would it be different?
Sir, in terms of the PPP mode in which I would be willing to work with them, based on the recent evidences, I would like to go with the hybrid annuity models where there is a more transparency and the success rate is much better than the EPC models, because EPC still suffers from the all the finances from the government side, and privates only taken for their consultation and expertise.
Now, hybrid annuity model is all right. Then in hybrid annuity, you only give part of the amount and subsequently make the contractor get back in annuities over a period of 20 years or 25 years.
Yes, sir.
But if you have less number of contractors who have the real capacity to bid, say there are 5 national highways worth about 50,000 crores, and there are only 3 or 4 contractors who have enough capacity, having got work full on the hands, they would like to come and bid. So obviously there will be collusion. So how do you differentiate between a collusion and a healthy, alliances between, somebody who has a financial capacity, somebody who has got a technical capacity, both coming together is all right. But then if one contractor wants to scratch the back of the other and say that you quote less here, I quote more there, I quote less here, you quote more. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sir.
So how do you prevent this from happening?
Sir, one solution to me right now is using the informal networks to get into the information. But sir, in reality, I think I need to understand this issue more, because at this point, I do not know how to solve this riddle.
Okay. Now you join railway traffic service, for instance, and you are asked to privatize 100 routes for services privatization. All right. Say
Yes.
catering. Though IRCTC is there, catering and bedrolls and all other services, watering, etc. And you are asked to call for bids. Now, how do you proceed to ensure, number one, that your boss has no problem with the bids? Okay, the judiciary has no problem. The Comptroller and Auditor General has no problem. The judiciary has no problem. The Vigilance Commission has no problem. The press has no problem. You'll have to package in such a way that you complete the procurement process without any criticism from any quarter. Can you imagine a situation like this? And if so, how do you proceed?
Sir, the document and the company record checks can be done. When we ask for the bids, I hope that we also ask for the company related financial documents from them. And there are also other records. And if we go very diligently into these details through formal, informal channels and engage with the people who have been into these processes, we may get an idea.
Okay, will you give to one contractor all these 100 routes, or will you give to 100 contractors at the rate of 1 each?
So I am never in favor of all the power, capital, and contra things in just single or few hands, because it will be cartelization, lead to a lot of unethical practices. But I will try to manage this idea with the idea of keeping public interest and the expediency of the project, that it goes on without compromising the integrity of the project.
Then if you avoid cartelization and give to say 50 contractors, at the rate of 2 each, there will be criticism that you are giving away to BJP workers. How do you overcome that? Have you heard of any procurement procedures of the World Bank or other multinationals, where the multilateral financing agencies, where they have something called packages and slices, and bidding for both packages, all slices, and they evaluate and see which is going to give you the better return is going to be selected. Have you heard of any such packaging for procurement?
Sir, one international I'm aware about it is the Swiss Challenge, in which they do a different kind of bidding process. But sir, apart from this, my knowledge, ambit of my knowledge is a little limited.
No, Swiss Challenge is like reverse bidding. It's not something new.
Yes.
Just like reverse bidding all the time. Now you think of a situation where, because the Essential Commodities Act, the hoarding provisions are taken away, and now the private sector has freedom to hoard or store whatever quantities of food grains they would like to store, and there's a lot of FDI inflows also coming into the country. So, will you look at a situation where the current commission, which is called the Competitive Commission, which was called MRTPC before,
Yes.
you think they have all the wherewithal to see that making use of this lifting of the provisions related to voting, a lot of money coming from foreign countries, will there not be cartelization taking place in the country as far as food commodities are concerned?
Sir, I do envision a future where there is a cartelization, especially in the commodities, warehousing, all these businesses. Already, the cartelization is present in the richer states of our country. So, these taking away of the provisions from the Commodities Act would have been beneficial for us if there has been a competition, a tremendous competition for the produce of farmers. But only privatization and private players bidding within themselves a cartel, I don't think ultimately the farmer will be benefited, for which these things were done.
In any case, the farmers' interests lie elsewhere. Once the procurement is over, the farmers' interest is over. They get their price and they be done with it. Or if they don't get proper price, there is a different course of action for
Yes.
them. But having procured, if the food grains are hoarded by these limited agencies and the kind of orthodox tools with which our competitive commission functions, all right, then with your kind of knowledge about alliances and unholy alliances, holy nexus, how will you ensure that they don't, hoard, by making use of the relaxations given in the provisions of the law?
So to prevent this, there has to have a ceiling more better market intelligence with the competition commission about who has how much facilities to store these grains, how much is coming out, looking at the trends, exact grain in the market. So we have to strengthen our information system, surveillance system, and monitoring, and a sharper eye towards the violation.
Now, tell me if you know something of the permission given by the Union government to the states post-corona to raise resources to cope with the situation because of the reducing revenues to the state sector. Certain conditional permission has been given to raise resources by relaxing the provisions of FRBM Act. Now, what is that FRBM Act and what are the relaxations and what are the conditions attached? Can you tell me?
So FRBM Act is Fiscal Responsibility Budgetary Management Act. In this, we have limits to reduce our revenue deficit to zero and a fiscal deficit within, I think it was around 2 or 3, sir, I'm forgetting, 2 or 3% over in a phased manner or in a certain number of years. Because earlier state governments had to procure after taking permission from the central government, because central government acts as a guarantor to these external commercial borrowings. So now in the wake of Corona and lack of the financial resources with us, they have given the flexibility.
External commercial borrowings or borrowings within the country is not the issue, but what conditionalities have been imposed by Government of India? If you know, you can tell me.
So exact conditions I need to look into.
All right. So before I pass it on to my co-panelists, tell me, is there going to be any conflict of interest due to the lateral entry at the joint secretaries level? Professionals who have, professionals like you after 15, 20 years of experience in private sector, they are asked to join as joint secretaries. And they would have advocated to their employers, some course of action to get their way through. And in the same ministry, the guy comes and sits as joint secretary. Will he bat for the boss with whom he worked before, or will he be loyal to Government of India? Won't there be any conflict of interest?
So there will be a clear conflict of interest. We may see a nexus collusion, and based on some close people, I have heard that these things are already happening. Our intent was to have more domain expertise, but this is a fallout, an unethical, unexpected fallout.
No, but these things are happening with permanent bureaucracy. There is a recourse to the subsequent government to take action against the permanent bureaucrats by initiating disciplinary action or prosecution. Now,
Yes,
these
sir.
private sector guys, neither here nor there. I'm not, criticizing them, but for 3 years they come here. They come out of private sector. They work in the government for 3 years. They're neither here nor there. So to curry favors from the political masters, unlike what Sardar Patel envisioned, they're not going to be the steel frame. They're going to be malleable and pliable. Will it be good for the country?
So definitely the question of integrity and the probity and their love for the administration and public service, the way it is deep rooted in the way from field experience a civil servant goes to these ranks, and from the private sector, so that would vary. But also it depends on the person in question. If the person who has come as a lateral entrant has the love for the country and the people and has been looking a way to work for the country and serve in true spirit, so then it will not be a case. A lot depends on how a person acts in this situation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Krishnarao garu.
You. Yeah. Dr. Divya Mishra,
Yes, sir.
we have had an excellent interaction with you, and it's more than an hour. And normally, the UPSC never invests more than 25 minutes on any candidate.
Yes, sir.
We found you very interesting. Now we'll give you feedback one after the other. Okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I look forward to it.
I find you extremely good in communications and full of ideas. Normally, these textile engineers or any engineer would not have this kind of a wide range of knowledge, especially about a gay professor of Israel who is an ardent fan or follower of Vipassana and who says he owes quite a lot to Goel,
Yes, sir.
the
Going
man
forward. Yes.
So certainly you are not a run-of-the-mill candidate, and you would certainly make a great addition to the Indian Administrative Service in view of your very, very broad views, and you certainly have the right background. You are very good in communications. You are able to put across your ideas without any problem. And in those areas where you may not have much knowledge, like the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act and its linking with the borrowing of the states from the Reserve Bank of India in this pandemic situation, and the conditionalities or the criteria imposed by the Finance Ministry, etc., you were able to gloss over it very easily. And even this bidding process, all that you will know once you enter the IAS. As a generalist, you may not know all these things, though you did mention about Swiss challenge method, which is a reverse kind of a tendering process. So anyway, I find you extremely good, and I find nothing at all by way of areas in which you have to work. But I'm sure my co-panelists will be able to find some chip or chink in your armor, which requires some repairs and looking into. So I'll now pass you on in the same order in which you were interviewed. So Dr. Satyanarayana, followed by Dr. Somashekar, and then eventually by our former Chief Secretary, Dr. Gopal. He was our Chief Secretary. So Dr. Satyanarayana garu.
Yes, sir. So Divya,
Yes, sir.
I completely agree with our chairman. You are highly matured, got very wide knowledge base. Your communication skills are excellent, and you are very honest with the views. So these qualities are very much required for a bureaucrat. However, I would like to add a few. When we discuss on the public intellectual, because when we discuss about Harari. Harari, we have to start with a public intellectual because this person is coming with original ideas. He is not scaring about whether they are being accepted or not. So he is expressing those things. Such people are very much required in a society.
Yes, sir.
But when we talk about a public intellectual, normally these people have to create the space by themselves. Nobody is going to create space. So this aspect, I think you can remember.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Especially in India, where the space is now shrinking,
Yes, sir.
when compared to the previous even years. But now there is a urgent need for our people to create space for themselves. And the diversity which you have rightly stressed is to be kept because India is such a vast country with a lot of diversity. Second aspect is about when we discuss about the founders of Indian philosophy, you started with the Gautam Buddha. Gautam Buddha, in fact, revolted against the status quoism of that particular period. Actually, if you can see the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, you find two characters. One is called the Uddalaka and the other is called Yajnavalkya.
Right, sir. Now I'm remembering something.
Yes, yes. So Uddalaka laid the foundation for the materialism in India, whereas Yajnavalkya laid the foundation for the idealism. So these two streams became very, very powerful. And what happened is the stream of idealism got strengthened over a period of time. Okay, so that's the reason we must be very clear about the founders of the Indian philosophy. So when I ask about the women philosophers, so we must start with India. So Gargi and Maitreyi, these are the two old
Yes,
philosophers in our philosophical system. When we talk about the Westerners, Ayn Rand, I've talked about, I think you can read, it will be very interesting. Though you may not agree with her, but her views are very, very interesting. So she wrote excellent books like The Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead, like that. These books are very interesting. What she says is this: she talks about the freedom, and she says that everyone has the right to make his or her own decisions, but none has the right to force his decision on others. So that's very simple, but it's very, very important.
strong and important.
Yeah, very strong in her ideas, and she stands for the individualism. So she developed the system called the objectivism in philosophy. So she bats for capitalism because that suits her philosophy.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So immediately we can see John Rawls. He stands in a different way.
Yes,
So
sir.
like that, her philosophy is very strong. That's why I brought it here. And coming to the pleasures of philosophy, I think you all heard about, might have heard Will Durant. Will Durant, he wrote a series of books on the pleasures of philosophy. And in fact, on Western philosophy, he wrote very good books. I think you will be benefited by reading his books, especially on the pleasures of philosophy.
Sir, I will.
Yeah, please go through those things. And coming to the last point about the again Harari. So you start with is a gay, homosexual, vagera. I think that's not a good introduction because this person is a very positive person. And in fact, when COVID-19 struck, when Donald Trump refused to give money to WHO, he came forward to give $1 million. I think for such a small person, giving $1 million is a big gesture. It's a gesture. So we have to highlight such type of good things rather than his personal traits.
Right.
So that's what I would like to tell you here. But it's really enjoyable to talk to you. You got high maturity and you got the broad views. That's what we expect in the bureaucracy. I think people like you should come to bureaucracy so that you can add a lot of variety and diversity to the thinking process of the bureaucrats. Wish you all the best.
Thank you a lot, sir.
Pleasure.
To Divya Mishra, I think we had a broad discussion on a range of subjects, and you come across as somebody who has depth and also frankness in responses. I think it is quite good. From the way UP government is managing the COVID pandemic, you are quite frank in saying there is a change now and how the change is showing some result to earlier. And also, if you look at women entrepreneurship and the low numbers, what are the hurdles they face, what are the practical issues, I think you are quite clarity and how it can be taken forward also come across as very insightful. Similarly, I think even in your understanding of Harari and the contradiction with what I said about the present governance and leadership in India, how you will navigate this or find balance. I think you seem to be quite thoughtful and also thinking in terms of handling this. So I think it's a positive trait. I think overall, I think I find your broad spectrum of understanding of subjects, business, strategic management, and also technology. I think should be a good combination for a career in bureaucracy, and I wish you make it this time. All the best.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Dr. Divya Mishra, you got the doctorate already confirmed?
Yes, sir.
Alright.
Defense is complete.
Good. Now, I only wanted to see, because my presumption was that the other members would have generally explored your interest in various topics which are happening around. And I wanted to see if you could relate, since you studied management and did doctorate, to the day-to-day situation. And it's not necessary that you should apply your knowledge without having any feel of, tenders or procurement procedures, etc. But I just wanted to see somewhere whether you could relate your knowledge, and you have acquitted yourself well when you said that the market intelligence mechanism of the Competition Commission of India should be strengthened. And had you known the contents of the act that has been passed completely, you would have further taken it forward and would have said that if I had, based on my knowledge, my research knowledge, established that there is a collusion between these players, among these players, I would have invoked the emergency provisions of EC Act and said, now no holding will be permitted and these stocks should be released. Because if they are in a position to determine or fix prices because of collusion agreements, there is a provision to invoke the EC Act, notwithstanding the liberalization regime that had permitted some holding.
Yes, sir.
So that is what I wanted to test, and I think you were able to relate it very well. But what is required is, my only suggestion, since you are away from the general happenings around in the country, maybe in the course of your submission of thesis, now it's time for you. Luckily, you had the time. So keep yourself abreast of whatever the important developments that have taken place in the past 1 year or so that you'll be able to meet the interviewer's expectations in a much. There's nothing wrong in your saying, sorry, I don't know, I'm not expert to this, or it was not part of my research, so on and so forth. It's okay. But then if you are abreast with these happenings, like the 4 conditions, you would not have read papers, or you would not have gone into depth with these developments which have taken place over a. So try to spend some time, and I think then you will be able to do very well in the interview. And that's all. I didn't want to say anything else. I wish you all the best. One more, just word of caution. One word of caution. In the context of states borrowing, you said ECB. Now it's very dangerous. External commercial borrowings, state governments have no freedom.
Yes.
Governments have no freedom to borrow on commercial terms from foreigners. And if there is a multilateral or a bilateral aid that is coming forward, it's okay, it can come to the state, but ECB requires BES approval and all that. So please be choosy in using words where you are not fully acquainted. That will do good. All right. All the best.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'll read more about the bidding process and the ECBs and FRBMs.
Okay, Dr. Divya, you have heard the exhaustive feedback from all of us. At the end of which, is there anything you want to ask us?
Sir, I have been going through a lot of critical content, positive content on the farm bills and the Essential Commodities Act. There is a criticism that it permits unlimited hoarding. So this is completely against the interest of our farmers. Though some things might make commercial sense, but social sense has also to be made in these decisions. So I wanted to know more nuanced
Okay,
way of-
I'll respond to this. Firstly, as an intelligent observer of the happenings in India, you are expected to know both sides of this farm laws.
Yes, sir.
There are legal issues, whether the parliament is indeed competent to make laws on a subject which is figuring in the Schedule
States.
7 state list.
Yes, sir.
Therefore, that is one question, but the matter is to be decided by Supreme Court, not by you and me. Then there is a perspective of the farmers who are largely from Punjab and Haryana and Western UP and who are more obsessed with minimum support price than actual content of these three laws. The third thing is what is termed as hoarding by one side is actually storage, so that in the times of crisis like onions, etc., the market would be able to receive from the cold storage and others. And if there is no upper ceiling by way of storage, I mean, there used to be because the essential commodity, but now that the proposed law, not exactly proposed, it is a law which is passed, but it has been stayed by the Supreme Court for 18 months. So if that stay is vacated, then many people can buy and store it in the cold storage or somewhere else and release it to the market when there is a demand,
Yes, sir.
so that the prices will fall. So in all these controversial issues, there is one more called the central vista. In all these controversial issues, we have to present both sides as a neutral observer. And at the end of that, if the board asks you, which one do you support? Then you are at liberty to support anybody, depending on your own. In fact, you did mention that what you have learned from Harari is that there is no reliable single narrative.
Yes, sir.
So that is what it is in India also. There is nothing like absolute truth. There is no single narrative. There is no single point of view. It's a combination of not less than two, sometimes many. So I'm sure as and when a question is posed, you will be able to do very well. No problem at all. You are a mature person. So is there anything else you want to ask?
So I think I will ruminate more on the what has been discussion so far, because it was very enriching for me. So I need
You
to
can
work
ask for
through
a
what's going on in my mind, all the feedbacks and all the questions.
you can ask for a recording of this particular mock interview, and you can watch. Okay. All the best then. God bless you.
Thank
I'm
you,
sure
sir.
you will join the IAS. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.